Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're really diving into the world of the business analyst. It's a fascinating area, and we've got this great set of sources to guide us, basically 15 key interview questions, plus their answers. It's a really insightful way to look at the role, I think.
It really is because, these questions, they aren't just about passing an interview, are they? They actually give us a pretty neat structure to understand, well, the core job, the skills you absolutely need, and the kind of thinking that makes a good business analyst tick. So our mission today is to pull out the really key stuff from these Q&As, give you a solid map of what this role is all about.
Yeah, get ready for maybe a few aha moments. We're going to explore how these BAs, connect the business side with the tech side and why they're just so vital for making projects actually succeed. Okay, let's get into it. So if the business analyst is this crucial link, what's the absolute core of that role? What are they really doing day to day?
Well, the sources define it pretty clearly. They're the bridge between the stakeholders, the business folks, and the technical team building the solution. They're gathering requirements, analyzing them, making sure they're documented properly, and critically, making sure that what gets delivered actually meets the business needs that were laid out.
Right, so they're not just messengers.
Not at all. They're identifying the real problem underneath, often proposing solutions themselves. And they stick around too, supporting testing, implementation.
Yeah.
It's end-to-end involvement, really, kind of like the architect of understanding for the project.
Okay, the architect of understanding. I like that. So they translate business needs into tech speak. But how do they double-check that translation? How do they make sure the final thing, the actual product, really hits the mark for the business, not just what was maybe vaguely asked for at the start?
Yeah, that's crucial. It's all about validation and checking back in. It's not a one-shot deal. The sources point to a few key things here. First, constantly validating those requirements with the stakeholders. Keep checking.
Throughout the process?
Yeah, exactly. Not just up front. Then there's user acceptance testing, UAT. Super important. BAs also ensure traceability. That means making sure you can trace every requirement right through to a specific test case that proves it works.
No.
And even after launch, they're often involved in monitoring feedback. Does it really meet the business goals? Are users happy? It's a continuous loop, you see.
A loop, right,
Yeah.
not just a handoff. That constant alignment makes sense, prevents things going off the rails.
Precisely.
So, okay, requirements are obviously central to this. It sounds like detective work sometimes.
Yeah.
What are the main ways BAs actually go about gathering this info? What methods do they use?
Yeah, there's a whole toolkit of techniques. And which one you pick, well, it depends. Project scope, are stakeholders actually available? How complex is it? That sort of thing. Our sources list the common ones. Stakeholder interviews, just talking to people. Workshops, getting everyone in a room. Surveys can work. Digging through existing documents definitely helps. Sometimes, observation or job shadowing give you insights you just wouldn't get otherwise.
Seeing it in action.
Exactly. And brainstorming sessions, especially early on, for getting ideas flowing.
Right, multiple angles to get the full picture. Okay,
Yeah.
so you've gathered all this stuff.
Yeah.
How do you organize it? Because I know there's a difference between what the system needs to do and how it needs to do it, right?
Spot on. That's the distinction between functional and non-functional requirements. Functional requirements are the what. What features does it need? Log in, generate this report, save that data. The actions.
Okay.
Non-functional requirements are the how. How well does it perform? How secure is it? How easy is it to use usability? Can it handle growth scalability? These are critical quality attributes. A system might technically function, but if it's painfully slow or easy to hack, it's failed.
That's a really clear way to put it. Okay, and then there's this term, use case. What exactly is that, and how does a BA put one together?
Right, a use case. Think of it like a detailed story. It describes how a user or maybe another system interacts with the system we're building to achieve a specific goal. It breaks down who's involved, the actors, what needs to be true before they start preconditions, the step-by-step flow of interaction, and what the outcome should be.
So, like a mini script for using a feature, how do you write one, practically speaking?
Well, you start by identifying the actors. Who's using this thing? Then, define the specific goal they're trying to achieve with this interaction. After that, you map out the happy path, the normal expected sequence of steps. But then, and this is really important for making it robust, you add the alternative paths or exception flows. What happens if they enter the wrong password? What if the network fails? You cover those bases too.
Thinking through all the what-ifs. Got it. Now, documentation. You mentioned documenting requirements. The sources bring up BRD and SRS. Sounds like alphabet soup. What's the difference?
Huh? Yeah, lots of acronyms in this field. They are related, but definitely different. The BRD business requirements document is high level. It focuses on the business needs, the why behind the project, the goals the business wants to achieve.
The big picture.
Exactly. Then the SRS software requirement specification gets much more detailed. It takes the what and why from the BRD and translates it into specific technical details. Functional requirements, non-functional requirements. The stuff the developers actually need to build it.
Ah, okay. So BRD is the destination, SRS is the detailed map to get there.
That's a great way to think about it. Get those misaligned and uh-oh, you build something perfectly functional, just not what the business actually needed.
Yeah, I can see how that happens.
Yeah.
Okay, but plans change. Projects are messy. Requirements shift. How does a BA handle that? That sounds really tricky.
It is tricky. It's probably one of the biggest challenges. The key is having a formal change control process. You don't just say yes to every new idea. First, you assess the impact. What will this change mean for the schedule, the budget, the scope?
The ripple effect.
Precisely. Then you document the change request clearly. You get formal sign-off from the stakeholders. You update all the related documents, the SRS, maybe the BRD, test cases, and crucially, you communicate the change clearly to the whole team. No surprises. It's all about transparency and process.
Our sources mentioned a specific example, a tough project where the requirements were constantly changing. What was the BA's approach there? How did they cope?
Right, that example. It wasn't just about having more meetings. The BA was smart about it. They set up regular structured feedback sessions, made communication iterative. Critically, they also worked really hard up front to define clear scope boundaries, got stakeholders to agree on what was absolutely essential, the must-haves.
Ah, so prioritization became key.
Exactly. They used techniques like Moscow to help stakeholders prioritize. It provided a stable base, even while other things were shifting. Sometimes defining what you won't do is as important as defining what you will.
Moscow.
Mm.
You mentioned it. Can you break that down a bit more? And are there other ways BAs prioritize?
Sure. Moscow's pretty popular. Stands for must have, should have, could have, and won't have this time. It's a fairly intuitive way to categorize features.
Right.
Then there's the Kano model. That one's interesting. It looks at how features impact customer satisfaction. Separates basic needs from performance features and delighters. And another one is the 100-point method. Stakeholders get, say, 100 points to spend on the requirements they value most. Forces some tough choices. But the underlying principle for all of them is collaboration with stakeholders and basing decisions on things like business value, urgency, technical feasibility, balancing those factors.
Finding the sweet spot. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Tools. What software does a BA typically have open on their screen?
Ah, the toolkit.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some common players. JIRA is almost everywhere for tracking tasks, user stories, bugs.
Project management stuff.
Yep. Confluence is huge for documentation, wikis, sharing knowledge. For diagrams, process flows, org charts, MS Visio, or newer tools like Lucidchart are standard. Good old Excel is still indispensable for data analysis, modeling sometimes. And for wireframing or prototyping interfaces, Balsamiq or Figma are really popular.
Maps, basically.
Exactly. And often, SQL skills are needed too. Being able to query databases directly to get data insights is a big plus.
Makes sense. Now, Agile. That's a huge buzzword in project management. How does the BA role change in an Agile setup compared to, say, a more traditional waterfall project?
Oh, it changes quite a bit. It's much more dynamic. In Agile, the BA is usually embedded right within the development team. They work super closely with the product owner, helping to flesh out the product backlog. A big part of their job is writing and refining user stories. Those short, user-focused descriptions of what needs to be built, they also help define the acceptance criteria for those stories. How do we know when this story is truly done? And they're active in all the Agile ceremonies. The daily stand-ups, sprint planning meetings, retrospectives. It's all about continuous communication and feedback, much less about massive upfront documentation.
Okay, so user stories are key in Agile. You mentioned use cases earlier. They sound kind of similar. What's the actual difference?
Good question. They can seem similar. A user story is typically very short, very simple. Usually follows that as a user, I want action. So that benefit format. It's meant to be a placeholder for a conversation.
Quick and focused.
Exactly. Perfect for Agile sprints. A use case, though, is much more detailed. It's that step-by-step script we talked about, including alternative flows, exceptions, much more comprehensive. You might see use cases more in waterfall or maybe alongside user stories in Agile if you need really deep documentation for a complex feature. Think bite-sized story versus full screenplay.
Gotcha. Bite size versus screenplay, that helps. Okay. Shifting to analysis frameworks, GAP analysis. What is that used for?
Jockey analysis is basically about figuring out where you are now versus where you want to be. You identify the current state of a process or a system, or the whole business even. Then you define the desired future state. The gap is everything that needs to happen to get from here to there. It helps businesses pinpoint what needs changing, what resources are missing. It's a roadmap for improvement or transformation.
Identifying the bridge you need to build.
Exactly.
And SWOT analysis. Everyone's heard of SWOT, but how does it fit into the BA's world?
Yeah, SWOT is a classic. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Strengths and weaknesses are internal things. What are we good at? Where are our limitations? Opportunities and threats are external market trends, competitor actions. BAs use it with stakeholders to get a really good snapshot of the current situation. It helps inform strategy. How can we leverage our strengths? How do we mitigate our weaknesses or guard against threats? It's strategic context.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about people. BAs deal with a lot of different stakeholders, as we've said. What about the difficult ones? The ones who are resistant or maybe just unclear or keep changing their minds? How does a BA navigate that? That sounds stressful.
It definitely can be, and honestly, those soft skills are just as vital as the technical ones here, maybe more so sometimes. The key strategies. First, stay calm. Don't react defensively. Second, really listen. Try to understand the reason behind their difficulty. What's their underlying concern or fear? It's often not what they first say.
Digging deeper.
Build rapport. Be transparent about the process, the limitations, the decisions. Involve them where you can. Giving people some ownership often reduces resistance. And finally, use data and your analysis. Back up your points with facts. Link things back to the agreed business goals. It helps depersonalize the discussion. Focus on the objectives, not just opinions.
So it's a mix of empathy, process, and data.
Absolutely. It's a delicate balancing act sometimes.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, our listener? We really walked through the business analyst's world, seeing how they're that vital connection point, translating ideas into reality, using those interview questions as our guide.
Yeah, and looking at the bigger picture, you can see the role is really about creating clarity. It's about precision. It's about making sure every single thing done on a project actually serves a clear purpose that everyone understands. Understanding needs, managing inevitable change, validating the outcomes. It's all crucial for success. We've touched on quite a bit Moscow, BRDs versus SRSs, handling tricky stakeholders. Which, it brings up an interesting thought. How could you maybe apply some of this business analyst mindset, identifying needs, looking at the current situation, defining where you want to go in your own work or life? Even if you're not a BA, maybe try a quick JP analysis or even a simple SWOT on your next personal goal or a decision you need to make.
That's a great point. It really shows how these structured ways of thinking about problems and solutions can be useful pretty much anywhere, not just in IT projects. Definitely something to think about until our next deep dive.